Hey everyone, so this is Q&A number 6. Today we actually only have one question, so we're gonna, talk about it, and then we'll just see where it goes. Okay. So the question is from Beata. Grief, guilt. I have started experiencing grief deeper I go into awakening journey. I am healing so many things like shame, judgment, people pleasing, etc., and all of that is wonderful. I am becoming a better version of myself, which I am grateful for. But the more I heal, the more I see how egoistic and toxic some of my behaviors were towards my daughter, and that just breaks my heart. I started working with a counselor way before my awakening journey. My awakening journey have started because I wanted to break generational trauma and provide better life for my daughter. But more I am becoming aware of things, the more I see how some of my behaviors were the same as my parents. And I can't go back to the past and take that away. Past is the past. As hard as I've tried to change things, I was unsuccessful. I feel that I failed as a mother. Of course, there are also good things that I have provided for my daughter, like physical touch, carrying love, which I have never experienced from my parents. But even with that, my daughter struggles with fear of abandonment. Sorry, just one second. Fear of abandonment, anxiety, depression, and other things. Now the awakening is happening to me, but I have to watch my daughter struggle with these things. I just feel it is so unfair. I've lived my life. It wouldn't matter to me for things to change for me as long as my daughter could heal and be happy. I wish the awakening would have happened to her instead. She has a whole life ahead of her. Having glimpses of the unconditional love made me realize that I haven't loved a day in my life. The love that we feel doesn't come close to the unconditional love that we all are. And again, even though that love feels amazing, my heart bleeds at the same time. I've been crying for 3 days now. And sometimes I wish the awakening didn't happen to me because it's painful to see some things. So my question is, have you experienced grief over the ways of living before awakening, and also grief that other people can't choose the awakening unless they decide that for themselves? In other words, we can't take others along with us on that journey. As for processing, I've been crying rivers of tears, but is there anything else to do to process the grief that may be helpful? Thank you. So that's extremely difficult, Beata. And I mean, that's incredible, crying for 3 days. I know that it's hard, it feels repetitive, and it's never going to end, and it's just why I feel all of this pain that doesn't stop. But, as we've said before, that's exactly what happens, and it's extremely healing. Um, Let me just look back here so I can just comment on it. Um, so, oh yeah, so I was saying this to Joe before we started recording that one of the things that we have not experienced, that we can't experience, is what you're experiencing because we are not parents. And so this must be one of the most difficult things to experience in awakening, to realize so deeply first how people have hurt you, but then maybe how you have hurt other people. So if that is like insanely difficult right now, that makes total sense. But that's really, really hard. Um, and what I also wanted to say about that is it's not going to take the pain away, right? Because you have to, as you're doing, you have to keep crying. But I just want to remind you that you were once, a little girl, and then you were deeply mistreated, basically your entire childhood. So that was not your fault. And then you grew up and you didn't know that you had been mistreated. You thought that that was normal. And then, eventually you had your daughter, and then you treated her sometimes in a way that now you can see was not ideal. But even in those moments, that was basically the little Beata, the child in you, you could say, that was doing all that. And so it's kind of, for all of us, it's just an unfortunate cycle that parents treat their kids like this, and then these kids grow up to be adults that have kids. And it's actually nobody's fault, right? That's the part that's kind of strange. It's like humanity is trapped in this ego cycle of passing the ego to to your children. And so even though, of course, when you see what you've done and you're crying and crying, just to remember that it's not your fault and that you are doing the best that you could. You just couldn't, like, see, now you're aware of what you did. So now you have a little bit more power to do things differently. But if you couldn't, you didn't have the awareness, then it was just the ego in your mind doing those things through your body, right? That's why horrible things happen in the world. It's almost like the ego, this thing in the mind that is imaginary, hijacks the body, almost like a parasite, and takes over, right? That's why some people harm others or even kill others over words, right? Somebody might say something really offensive, and that person has so much rage that it takes over their body and they can kill someone for speaking, right? That I'm sure that has happened in the world. And so it's not your fault because the thing that did those things is technically not you. So I just wanted to say that. I know at the end of the day, it's still you, but to remind you that it's not your fault. Um, do you have something, Joe?
Um, well, yeah, I was going to add that, of course, it's extremely difficult to be able to see the past with clearer vision now that you're healing. But as you continue to heal, what will happen is, although at the moment, there's a lot of self-judgment for some of the things that has happened here. But with more and more healing, which you're clearly well in the process of, it's all happening naturally. You're crying a lot. That self-forgiveness will happen as well. Um, and that's, maybe the most potent uh, part of the healing journey for you and your daughter. Um, because once you've forgiven yourself, um, then you'll be able to move forward. But I was also going to say that uh, communicating your awareness is also very powerful and healing. So whichever way is works for you and your daughter, but apologizing for things um, is an extremely powerful thing to do as well. To let the person know um, that can be obviously doesn't change anything that happened, but it will be healing, for you and your daughter to communicate in that way. So yeah, just wanted to add those two things.
Yeah, there's a few things. So about forgiveness. So forgiveness is not something that you do. It's not an action. I guess
Mm.
you could call it a state of forgiveness. And the only way that you're in, one day you'll be in that state is just by crying, but also the anger is very important. So I think I remember Artem saying, sometimes when we talk about the stuff that he said, if I don't say his name, I almost feel like I stole it in a way, but whatever. So he says that shame, let's see if I can say it correctly. Oh, maybe I'll just do guilt. Guilt is when you have anger towards yourself because you feel you did something wrong and you feel sadness. So in this case, it would be that Beata feels anger at herself that she mistreated her daughter. And the tears in that moment feels like it's for her daughter. And shame is reversed. It's when someone has done something to you. So your anger is not directed at you, it's directed at them, and the tears are for yourself. So I just wanted to say that. And that forgiveness, yeah, it's like you don't have to even worry. Like some people are like, how am I going to forgive this person? Look at what they did to me. The reason they're asking that is because they are full of tears and full of rage at that person. And so those things have to, like you're doing releasing. And I did want to, to say something hopeful is that even though she may still be doing it, I don't know, maybe to this day, it feels so impossible that what you're experiencing, the tears and the grief and everything is so deep that it feels like it's never going to change. But if you do it enough times, the odd thing is that eventually it sounds odd to say you won't feel anything. That's the depth of if you just keep feeling into the emotions and maybe it'll stop. Maybe you do it for 5 days and then suddenly it stops. Doesn't mean that it's completely gone and it comes back later. And so if you just keep releasing, these miracles happen where it's like the mind or the ego might even say, what, you don't even feel guilty anymore, like at all. So what, you've become evil now? You don't, and actually no, it's just the emptiness of not having the tears and the anger. So that's all that forgiveness is. It's just look at this, huge amount of tears and anger, and as you release all of it, once a probably a big chunk of it is gone or all of it is gone, you have forgiven yourself or forgiven another person. Um, I'm trying to remember what you said, but go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that to reiterate, basically that it's a natural occurrence. Forgiveness is something that will occur. It's not something that you actively do, you know. Um, which is exactly what you were saying. So at the moment, your tears may well be for your daughter very much, and I'm sure it won't be like linear, like, oh, I've done all my the tears for my daughter, now I'm gonna cry for myself, and now I forgive, everything. It'll be like this, I'm sure. But you could expect a lot of tears for yourself. You know that your the chain of abuse that happens to everyone pretty much um, will be, seen very, very clearly, even in sharper focus than it currently is. And yeah, you'll cry a lot for yourself. And it's funny when we hear the word like or the phrase that we'll hear nothing. The ego doesn't like that, and it immediately goes to like numbness. I was like, oh, I don't. To be a good person, you should feel sorry for people. You should feel regretful, but it's a nothingness that accepts everything. So it's not volatile like the emotions that we experience on the spiritual journey. It's void of that, but it accepts everything. So just a disclaimer, because you know, there's certain words and phrases that our language, um, we can't capture the reality because our ego hijacks these words and tries to, say that they're good and bad and all of these things.
Yeah. Um, oh, and you said this, I just wanted to stress it that, whenever Beata is ready, that the crying and the anger, that's like the most important. But whenever you feel ready, what will make you feel better is you trying to treat your daughter the best way possible and being open, like you said, apologizing. You can have like if it's possible, I don't know the exact relationship, if the daughter feels resentful, I don't know, but it's like if you have a conversation where you kind of open up, from your heart and you say like, I've just realized I've done all of this, that conversation can be very powerful. It's also very difficult to do it. So it's like only when you're ready. But that would also, it's so interesting and it's a blessing that most parents don't ever realize what they've done or they deny it, right? If the That's like really, really difficult, which is actually Beata's case with her parents, that
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
we've
yeah,
done nothing, how dare you? But
yeah.
it's a gigantic blessing that Beata knows and you have the time to correct it, to
Mhm.
have a different relationship. And that's amazing, right?
Yeah, that's really amazing. Um, so few people get to experience that either as the person that breaks the chain or is someone who's a child of someone who has broken that chain. Um, so yeah, it's very special, you could say, in that regard. Um, yeah, were there any other parts of the question that we could pick up on?
I just thought of something which says the part that she says, where did it go? That I failed as a mother. Why did
Hmm.
I use
It says, I feel I failed as a mother.
Oh, okay, I see it, yeah. What I was going to say about that is I already said it, but this is like another angle. So I think pretty much everybody, I mean, the very rare parents, they're almost like the rarest thing on the planet that are actually very emotionally mature. So that's almost like nobody. It's like 99.9 or even more parents, they don't know what they're doing, right? So what I wanted to say is I have failed as a mother. So that word mother in our minds is like this figure, right? But if your psychology, which like I said is every pretty much all parents' psychology, you were treated so poorly that basically your brain couldn't develop the way that brains should develop. And so I think I've said this before. It's like you look at parents and they could be like 38 years old when they have their first kid, right? Oh, they're the adults. But emotionally speaking, there's the adult body And it's like imagine a little kid inside controlling everything. So that's the image that I have in my mind. Oh, this is an adult, right? This is a serious person. But then if you could really see who they are psychologically and emotionally, it would be like a 5-year-old or like something like that. And so when you say I have failed as a mother, there's a little bit of like a misunderstanding that like, oh, I'm this adult that everybody thinks, right? Just because you look like an adult, people think that makes you an adult. But I would say that an adult is someone enlightened, right? That's like a funny way to look at it. It's like that's a real adult. And so what I was going to say is you didn't fail as a mother because you were trying your very best to be a good mother. But inside of you is basically what is running the show? It's like a hurt child. A hurt child that, for example, was told probably crying is, don't stop crying, don't do this, don't do that, rejected, abandoned. And so that was like the environment. And so now that child is raising a child. So I wanted that image. That's almost all parents. You think that they're adults. It's literally children raising children. It's not adults, because if they were actual adults, they wouldn't do all that stuff, right? And so I just wanted to say that to make it really clear that it's not your fault and you didn't fail as a mother because what else could you have done? It's literally impossible if you're deeply mistreated and abused to suddenly be a good mother. It's like it's impossible.
Yeah. And then these truths are true very much, but on your healing journey and in this moment, the things like being a being a bad mother may bring up immense emotion, which is the thing that you need to look at as well. So it's very simple, and you probably already know this, but there'll be the potential urge to sort of, justify and see things in different ways and build stories around things. But then, if you're really feeling like, oh my God, I'm the worst mother ever and I need to cry about this, that's the important thing. And then knowing these things, these truths, basically everything that Steve just said will become self-evident to you. It's not something that you need to hear and then believe. It might, click, but it will become evident to you. You won't have to hold on to things like that. Of course, it may be helpful, but just to say to embrace all of the pain that's coming currently.
Yeah, I like that you said that because the reason I said that before, so it's funny, it's like, if we could only telepathically, like a giant set of thoughts at once, it would be much better, right? But we have to use words. What I said, like, oh, you're not a bad mother, that's sort of like me trying to comfort, right? A little bit like remember, even though there's a lot of pain, remember that it's not your fault. But what you said is true. It's like I'm not saying that. This is where it's very useful to be very specific. The analogy of the actor that I've said so many times is so you kind of in the background always know it wasn't my fault. So that's kind of there always. It's kind of like your compassion that you have with yourself. But the moment that the pain is there, oh my God, I'm the worst mother in the world. I abused my daughter. I did this and this and this. You must fully embrace that. So it's like that's why it's like an actress. If you're feeling fine now, there's no character that you're playing as the actress. But suddenly you see a picture of your daughter, maybe as a child, and there's the trigger. And suddenly the thoughts are, I'm really negative, I'm a terrible mother. You have to switch in that moment and you become that character. And so as the tears come, you can literally like be crying and say, "Oh my God, I'm the worst mother. Like, I should have never had my daughter," whatever the thoughts are, and you fully become the character and you release, however, sobbing. And you will feel if you just keep sobbing that eventually that fuel, which was the trigger, disappears. And then you're kind of like, okay, I can't cry anymore. There's nothing there. So that is the I don't know if the word is to maneuver, which is, be kind to yourself, but the moment that the pain is there, it's like you put it aside. It's still there. You try to love yourself and be, compassionate towards yourself, but the moment that it's there, it's like try and fully be with the pain until it's gone. Um, Let me see if there's anything else. Okay, at the bottom, right? So, have you experienced grief over the ways of living? Like, absolutely. I've cried when it's incredible because you're going to feel this, on the spiritual journey that somehow you thought you went to the deepest level and then this always happened. Oh, there's a deeper level. There's just more clarity. And the moments that that would happen to me, it was like I was remembering a scene from not that long ago. It might have been like 8 years when I was such a different person, absolutely suppressed, being controlled by my ego and my fears. And I would remember how I was, but from this new perspective, like it was a realization, and I could see myself instead of seeing myself through the ego, I could see it through love. And then once I did, it was like, oh my God, I was judging this person that I was in the moment. That's all I could do. But then now I'm seeing myself. So it's kind of interesting. Like if I'm experiencing unconditional love, I'm looking in my mind at a version of me as if I'm the most unconditionally loving parent, kind of like God. But it doesn't make sense because God wouldn't have, I guess, emotions. But as you're looking through that unconditional love, and then you look back and you're like, oh my God, when I was 26 and I did this and I allowed people to do this to me, then you just start crying. It's a very deep crying because it's like you, like I said, it's like you're a parent looking at a child, except the child is just the pain inside of you. And you couldn't see it before. There were parts of you judging the fact that you were too weak or whatever it was. So there's a lot of that. Um, Grief over the ways of living before awakening. Yeah, and grief that other people can't choose the awakening. Um, that was an interesting one that I would have sometimes with strangers. Like if I was watching a YouTube video, and then I would kind of notice. In the beginning, I thought I was just being arrogant. So I would watch someone. I was like, oh my God, this person is like deluding themselves. They're lying to themselves. And then I would cry. And in the beginning, I thought, oh my God, I must be so arrogant that I think I'm crying tears for this person. Like I'm so loving. But actually, it turns out it was true. As it kept happening, I was like, oh my God, I'm not being arrogant. I'm actually crying because I know the pain that they're in. You see, it's not like from a position of superiority. It's like I know exactly the type of pain that makes someone lie to themselves. And that's all that they can do, right? Um, and then the bottom, so I've been crying rivers of tears. Is there anything else to process? Um, Well, one thing to intensify it would be to look for things like I mentioned, pictures if you have of your daughter. Like it's almost like if you want to do this, where it's like you're feeling fine, and then you're gonna look for the pain on purpose, you could do that. And so it's like you could look at baby pictures and all this stuff. And then so actually if you did want to do that and pictures are really triggering, my suggestion would be to literally do that until there's like a big, big shift. So it's like if you can every day or how whatever is comfortable for you, it's like now I'm gonna sit. Music, I don't know if there's sad music that triggers you, and then that could be two things. That can make it really powerful, pictures and sad music. And so if you did that every single time, that is kind of speeding it up a little bit, but it can be very, very intense, right? And draining. So it's like see what is comfortable for you, maybe once a week. I have no idea.
Yeah, I think Steve and I have talked about sort of crying fatigue, you know. Obviously
Yeah.
we talk about crying a lot and it's, you know, where everything leads to. But there'll be some times where you're crying and crying. It's like, can I maybe not cry for a little bit? But I mean, it makes sense because it's crying that we should have done in, you know, reasonable amounts through our development that we've got backlogged, you could say, in our
Yeah.
system, you know, decades worth, basically. So it can be very exhausting and quite annoying at times.
Yeah, I have felt that sometimes. I'm sure I can't remember, but there were, if I could remember, there probably were certain days that I cried like 10 times, I'm sure. But
Mm,
those were more rare, more like two or three,
mm.
two or three every day. But it's interesting. I often talk about like my journey. I think that it has been nonstop because of, as I've said, my situation where it's like I don't work and all this stuff. It is funny, right, to think that if you could choose that, nobody would choose it because it would become so horrible. I didn't choose it, basically. But the reason why it doesn't stop is because that's the worst case scenario for an ego is to be stuck with no purpose and all this stuff. And then you're just there. But then it's like day in, day out. Then it's like, okay, the ego's holding on week two, week three. Then what about week like week 30? It's
Yeah.
been like, almost a year. And then as it keeps going. So, um, like she said, she was crying for 3 days. That can happen. Um, but I don't know what I was gonna say. Um,
Because it's kind of good in a way. Obviously, the mind wants to say that it's not good, like, oh, I've been crying for 3 days, something must be terribly wrong. But in sort of a more objective view, like crying for 3 days straight is pretty good. Yeah.
yeah, it might be
Yeah.
years of pain.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe just another fun thing that I remember to share. When I was going through this process and it was just crying, forever, I did feel like a week would go by and I would say to my parents, I feel like I've this week was like 10 years. And then a year would feel like lifetimes. So that's
Mm.
interesting. So it's like if you release such an insane amount of emotional pain, even psychologically, something weird happens where it feels like, whoa, I've been here. Or I would say to myself, like even now, I'm 33, my birthday is in February, and now it's what, the 22nd of October. I feel like I'm still 33. Shouldn't I be like 39 by now in all of this releasing? And it's still kind of far away. I mean, November, December. So the time, as some people would say, time is experienced in an odd way when you're releasing emotions.
Yeah. And almost like life only kind of started sort of with it, I don't know if you feel that it's almost like the life after this journey has gone, somewhat far. It feels like something completely different to
Oh yeah.
what came before it. Almost like sort of sidestepping, and going, I don't want to get into like different realms, different timelines.
But I feel exactly the same way. Like, wait, what did you just say? You said about
Well, it's almost like a different life began, because I suppose you get to see more and more of what you actually are, and you never got to see any of it before. You completely bonded to your egoic character, and there was none of life as it really is. Well, not none, of course, everyone has moments, but yeah, it's just a very more completely different experience. Um, yeah, I can't remember how I got onto that, but it's interesting. It is also quite. I was interested in the bit that Beata mentioned about, sort of yearning for others to, awaken. Um, I feel like that in my experience has subsided a lot. It's like obviously with Beata's example, it's extremely painful because it's like really close to her suffering right now. Um, But I don't know how's your relationship to the idea of like wanting other people to to wake up? Um,
yeah, I think
it's
it's
kind of become very like if they do, they do, they don't, they don't. I cry tears for the suffering of especially my family. Not I was gonna say not their suffering,
I thought
it
you were gonna
is
say the
suffering.
world. That's good.
What did you say?
That would sound funny.
Crying tears for the world, did you say?
Yeah.
I have done that as well. Because I'm so unbelievably compassionate. Um, but I think because the ego only exists in your mind, when I've cried for my family, for example, it it's not really. paired with a wishing that they would unstick themselves from their dream, and wake up. That doesn't seem to be part of it. But I do cry tears for their egoic suffering,
Yeah.
when I'm in those moments.
And I was just going to say one quick thing about what you said before. For me, after, like you said, not in the beginning of awakening, especially not in the worst parts, but once it started to become good, probably in February of this year, I literally feel like I've been given a brand new life. Like it's like
Mhm.
a totally new thing. Um, and then what was the other thing that we were just saying about, what was it again? You just, oh,
When
crying tears for.
Well, yeah, crying tears for other people bonded with the idea of wanting them to wake up or, go through a spiritual awakening. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, what I was going to say about that, not in Beata's case, maybe because I think she wants it for her daughter, and like you said, that's very, very painful. But I wanted to talk about it in general, since other people may watch this. Um, that the desire, so this is kind of a funny one that the ego does. So once you begin awakening, I think pretty much everybody becomes very identified as being someone that is awakened, and you actually secretly think that you're special, right? You don't want to admit it, but you're very, very special. Some people will call it, I've woken up from the Matrix, look at all those NPCs, right? That's very common in many videos, which is actually just a hatred of those people. It's not something mild. Um, but what was I going to say? Um, yeah, the desire for people to wake up from that. So I wanted to talk about that. It's interesting because I'll just give you an example. So a person that's beginning to awaken, and when I say beginning, they could have watched a million videos and they know all these, things. They seem to have a lot of knowledge, but they're at the very beginning. They haven't cried, felt anger or fear, and yet they think they're almost done, right? They're at the very beginning. So an example is when someone is like that, they're at the very beginning, but they think that they're extremely awakened, and then they go out in the real world. So what they do is the classic one is, oh, I don't watch the news. I'm awakened. I don't watch the news. I don't do this, and that. And then that person comes across someone who is not awakened, right? So you would call them asleep. And they want to talk about something like the news or anything that this person thinks, oh, that's not spiritual. And in the moment that this person who is talking to this other person who they think is not awakened, and this guy thinks, oh, I can't speak to this person, or they get annoyed at them, or I have to get away from this person because they have bad vibes, right? They're not spiritual. I shouldn't be talking to them. That type of, you know, experience, I think it's interesting to talk about because that is just first arrogance. It is not the fact that you are awakened and that person is not. Um, I think maybe it's funny to say that what is awakening is the ego. If you actually think of if you actually think about it, the entire journey is the ego's journey of unraveling in the mind. And so if you think so, let's say if I think that I'm awakened and someone isn't, it's as if I'm comparing illusions. So it's like that person is completely unconscious, but I'm not enlightened. I still have an ego. And so it's like I'm saying my illusion is a little bit better than your illusion. And that's meaningless. It doesn't mean anything. So in reality, once someone like that begins probably naturally to suffer more deeply, and then they eventually are going to, fall to their knees and start crying. With a lot of that, what you'll find is that the people that you speak to, maybe your neighbor, and you can see that they have, they're not awakening, you'll see more and more interest in speaking to them because your identity, but it takes a long time. Your identity is no longer I'm the special person that's awakening. It starts to be just I'm a person, right? I'm just normal. And then it doesn't matter what you talk about, right? It is only the ego that's like, "Oh, I only talk about spirituality. I'm very advanced. Only these very sophisticated things, but you want to talk about sports or you want to talk about, oh no, that's the arrogance. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah. And then the further away you get from the position that you were just describing, this like very it's very obvious, you know, to define it now, but like at the time it will be subtle, like you sort of pity them or something. Um, But I think the further that you go, there's more of a simple acceptance of what is, and I don't think there's a yearning for them to be any way than they are, I suppose. Um, I think because the experience is just very neutral. It's not like I wish my brother could wake up,
Yeah.
or my best friend. Doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah. And
There's an understanding, of course, that a more awakened society would be a society in a state of less suffering, and that's
yeah,
a much more preferable um, world to live in. Of course, that fact doesn't change, but um, yeah,
there's so many like different angles that we can talk about. Like the one that I just said, it's like just to be aware, if you think that you're very special for, awakening, that is just more pain that has to be looked at. But what was I going to say? Today I'm off. I'm blanking. I don't know why. What was I talking about? Yes, it was to do with talking to someone that you think is not. Uh, no, maybe it just disappeared.
um, yeah. Let's see if there's anything else. Well, I think it's again. I think already sort of touched on it a bit, but the ego always tries to barter with the experience that it's having when it's unpleasant as well. So, although what's happening with Beata here is very good, you're crying a lot. This is the healing process. That's all it really is. Um, but the ego wants to barter and try and make it like a more bearable situation, something that it can, you know, have like another tool. Can it focus on something else? Can it do it in a different way? So that's always at play as well. So it's quite a difficult thing to wrestle with. The ego will never accept that just crying it out is all there is to do, as in like the doing of things. Um, and that even that can't be chosen. Like the tears will come. You can't try to cry. Really, when there's something to that's coming up, you can do some things to like help it along the way. Um, but yeah, I just maybe got the uh suggestion in the way that Beata phrased it that it's very unpleasant at the moment, of
Yeah.
course. Um, and that the ego will try to be like, can I do this a different way? Can there be something else here instead of just this crying, which I don't really rate? I don't, I don't, the ego doesn't value it, even though you can see that it's the thing that makes the difference. Um, so yeah, that was just another point.
And a reminder that if it's extremely, extremely painful to cry, that further down this process, it becomes easier and easier and easier until it's an odd experience. Like inside of you, there's a lot of pain, and yet the general experience is very easy. So it's a very strange thing. So it's not always going to be that level because it can be excruciating, and you think the whole journey is going to be like that. Could be for a while, but changes.
Yeah, I mean, me and you, Steve, were speaking about this the other day about I mean, I was saying that I had an experience where I was crying from the absolute depths of my being, but it wasn't an unpleasant experience necessarily because the association, the bonding with the thing uh that is crying, that is,
Yeah.
in pain. There's no believing, so it's a very strange situation where it's just like this guttural, deep, deep um crying is happening. And if you saw it from a third party perspective, you'd be like, oh, this guy is in like serious distress. But the actual experience of it's not that at all, and it's very, very strange. Um, and I can say not unpleasant, just simply happening, really. Um, and I think it's a good example because like I said, it was crying from as deep as I have ever cried, but 2 minutes later is no problem. And even during the crying, it was not a problem. Um, so yeah, it gets much, much, much easier.
Yeah. Um, well, if we can just look through it one final time, but we can just, you know, our conversations are about the spiritual journey, so we could also talk about things that are all related.
Yeah.
Um, I'm just trying to think here. Well, one thing that I wanted to reiterate that I said in the last live is that the reason why this journey seems to be like no matter how much you heal, or like, in our case, how much you cry and do this and that, nothing really giant is changing. That must be a lot of people's experience. And then that can be even discouraging. So like if you've cried, oh, I've cried 80 times if you counted somehow, and you're like, I don't feel any different. um, that actually has nothing to do with like that you did anything wrong, but the depth. So it's like I think you said a container, or what was it like? I mean, even this glass with water, right? So if imagine that like the full glass of water would be the amount of tears, that could be like 2,000 times. Like that would be all of the tears. And then I don't know if that would be accurate for me. If there's this much left, it's like, is there still? But that would be kind of half. So that would be insane if there was I've just cried this much, which is half. But the reason is, so think about it. If you'd have like little stages, and so it really might take all of this for you to finally feel the difference. So you could cry for like years. I don't know how often, but might take years. And then it would take so long to finally on a certain date you're like, oh my God, something brand new is starting to happen in my experience, which would be like this profound peace. But the problem is the depth of the journey. And so again, I wanted to say that is why people will tell you that you're in a loop of pain and it's never going to end. Because most people, it's too painful and too difficult. And actually most people, their circumstances wouldn't even allow for it. So there's usually many distractions, and for whatever reason they're not being triggered as deeply. So it would take so long if you're just imagine crying once a week, right, or once a month. It would take just forever. And so I wanted to just stress that that is the reason why it seems like nothing changes, because you have to almost develop over once it gets easier, you have to develop a desire to feel uncomfortable. It's like who wants that, right? But once you've seen enough of your pain that you begin to see the point of all this, then once you see the point of it, then you almost get an appetite for it, because you're like, the more that I cry, I know that eventually my life will permanently improve like a little bit more. And you're like, oh my God, here's the improvement. Then you're like, well, how can I find more? It kind of becomes, like we said, a little bit of an addiction. You're like, can I go on the internet and see something that's going to really trigger me, and then just feel with that. So at that point, but that's only when it gets easier, right? It becomes a little bit of an addiction.
Yeah. I think the important thing to realize, when you start, when this process starts, it just starts and you can't choose for it to stop, I don't think. But it's also, kind of daunting to know that you have to cry so many times and this is a very long process. But the thing is, as Steve said, is the changes that happen through emotional healing, through repressed emotions being processed, is that the difference is permanent. This frees you from the cycles that you perceived yourself being like, oh, I was doing so well for 2 months earlier this year, and then I had a really bad slump, and I've been really struggling for like, I'm not saying that that goes away overnight, um, but there's an idea that we carry that this is the human condition. This is the thing we have to endure, and sadly, many of us believe the patterns that we've seen are the way that we are. That's just how we're wired, and this is how I'm going to be for the rest of my life. People commit to um, being on medication for their entire lives, just because they think that that's how they are, that's what they need. And of course, they're not doing anything wrong. How could you think any other way, other than if this happens to happen in your life and you go through this process and you see that like you are forever different and it's only trending in the right direction over time. Um, so to the ego, it sounds daunting, but in reality, it's very, very encouraging.
Yeah.
I think the glass of water analogy is really good. That's exactly how I see it in my mind. Um, because as more goes down, more goes down. Things like insights and understanding happen as a byproduct, and these are the things that are alluring to us as part of the spiritual community and spiritual stuff. We like these insights and these things that come and these truths that we become privy to. These are the things that sort of like compel us towards it. Um, but the funny thing is you can boil it down to like a very simple, like you've got this many tears to cry, and once you've done them all, you're good.
Yeah. And one thing that I think is useful because it's like one of the frames I think for the journey is self-honesty. That's it. Like if you just think about it, brutal self-honesty. And so I just thought of sharing this. Like in my experience, because I've cried a million tears and all that, I finally have been able to see these big changes, right? That the ego, I still have an ego. The ego would call like this is enlightenment starting to happen, right? So like we've mentioned, like your perception of your vision changes, it becomes insanely pleasurable. And even these things, as they're changing, right, the ego is like, oh my God, now I've got blissful vision, or my vision is enlightened, something like that, right? But what I wanted to share is when I talked about the amount of tears, I I mean it's been for a very long time, but no matter how enlightened I feel sometimes, even though there's like, I'm still feeling so much pain, so much fear, no matter how enlightened my experience becomes, I think that one of the reasons, the same thing for Joe, I think, that we just keep, seeming to have progress is because no matter how enlightened our ego thinks we are always honest. We're never really trying to be enlightened. And that's actually a good thing. So it's like I showed this glass and then I said, I hope I'm not, this. But really my ego was like, I'm probably here. Like I've cried like 99% of my tears. So I kind of heard that thought in my mind. Now, if I wanted to, I don't even know if it's possible for me to lie to myself to that extent. But if I wanted to maintain this image of myself that I really have gone very deep into the journey, I would ignore that. I wouldn't even like acknowledge it. But that's there because I still have an ego, right? It might have become a little bit more transparent, but these are the types of things, self-honesty. And the self-honesty is always going to be something that the ego hates. So
Mm.
that part of the ego that said, I'm almost done, the journey, is the one that wants to maintain this image that I'm almost done. And so if I say that, I'm acknowledging the fact that that's just an arrogance within me. And the ego wants to say that, so basically I stop looking, right? The ego will never stop doing that. Every time you feel like an upgrade or something, like if oh my God, I feel a little bit more peaceful or whatever changes, I think you have the same experience. It's like every time the ego's like, I think I'm done. And that's the ego saying, stop looking. Stop looking at the pain because I'm disappearing. And
Yeah.
so every new thing, it's like, oh, I'm done.
Yeah, yeah. Let's just be comfortable. Let's just park here for the rest of our lives and we'll be fine. I mean, when you start seeing how often the ego does these things, it's a joke, honestly. It's hilarious how much it tries to claim. Even I think probably after every single meditation, there's an ego.
Yeah.
It's like, great, you probably pushed yourself to this close. Like, okay, there. Just sitting there for even just half an hour, it's like, yeah, you're good.
And that voice, which is part of the ego, right? The narrator, the one that describes and rehearses and everything.
Mm.
What you just said is like that's happened to me so many times where the meditation, I did one of those 3 hours and it was mostly just nothing happening. It was just peace. And so by the end, you're kind of drugged, right? Like when you wake up, because it's 3 hours when you get up. And the voice, which is the ego, said, I think this time it's gone. The voice of the ego saying it's gone. It's like, how can it be gone if it's
Still
speaking?
there,
Um, Maybe like another interesting thing to talk about is a little bit more of the ego, but more specifically, like how it works in the mind. Because I guess you have to talk about it like when it's not there. And even though we're not enlightened, we can kind of see as we. So, like I said, the narrator is it's not just that, but it's basically our whole psychology. And so if you think about it, the mind itself is not the ego. It's almost like it's like a computer. It's this incredible intelligence that we have, and inside of the mind is the ego, right? And some of the characteristics like thinking for no reason. So as we've watched Artem, who is enlightened and describes everything in detail. An enlightened person can think because the mind's ability, the mind's intelligence is thinking, right? Is the ability to solve problems, to do all sorts of things like create music and, be an engineer or whatever. That's all part of the intelligence of the mind. But the thinking that all of us do in our minds, that's really out of our control, 99.9 is useless thinking. It's thinking, like I said, you're looking at a flower and your mind is saying, "Oh, it's a flower." Like, why would you need a commentary if you're already looking at it, or it's ugly, or it's beautiful? Um, n- Planning, like if you said planning, like you have to plan a trip, you're gonna have to use your mind. So an enlightened person would be able to think of the future. They would buy the flight tickets and everything. But again, it's like you're doing something. I was gonna say images in the mind. That's the crazy one. You're walking somewhere, and you've got plenty to look at. The content is there. Your eyes can see. You can hear everything, and yet your focus is pointed inside the mind at images, imaginary images in the mind. So all of these things, and much, much more, all of our pain, all the triggers, that's the ego in the mind. And interestingly, all of that can disappear, right? It's crazy. And what was the other thing I was going to say? Yeah, I mean, I guess that's it. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I was going to say it may be helpful for people actually. Obviously, you have the space here in the community to do this. Is that seeing what the ego says is actually very funny, and me and Steve like talk and laugh a lot about what we hear ourselves say and think and all of these things. But up until it becomes a bit more detached, it's concerning, it's shameful, it's all of these things you know. Um, but hopefully, I'm just thinking that, maybe in more free-flowing dialogues and people feel, because it's actually liberating to say things out loud. I think me and Steve have done it so much that it's kind of second nature just to say things and there's no feeling attached to it. Um, but of course, that's taken a long, long, long time and a lot of uh, doing and seeing it for that to happen. But once you can see like, oh my God, my ego says this, and then sharing it, um, it's very. I think it helps the process. It helps to see that these things are just thoughts, feelings that they don't mean anything. They don't substantiate anything um, and sharing when there's a level enough comfort there to do so, I think can be very useful actually. But even if sharing isn't something that people would like to do, seeing it and kind of seeing the humor in it is interesting because you have to start to reconcile with how much of the bad there is, right? So if you think of yourself as a humble person, there's immense arrogance, and you actually have to see that. And um, it's not like an idea. It's like the arrogance is actually there. You are deeply, deeply arrogant as much as you are the thing that you think you aren't. And that would have mortified me to have thought of that, to have known that, years ago. But now it's hilarious, and if I see deep arrogance, it's not a problem. And I think being able to say and share if not, to others, but to yourself, um, is a very useful thing to do.
Yeah, and maybe it would be useful as we're talking about all this to kind of describe our inner experience. And the way that I would describe it is before we had this experience, you can imagine the ego part. So you just mentioned arrogance, right? So there's like for example, for me, there's the arrogant Steve in my mind. It's a character like in a movie, and it's only arrogant. Then you'd have a Steve that's jealous of people. So you have all these characters in the mind. And the experience that we're having now is that we are the space in which the ego arises. We're not the ego parts. And the odd thing is that it's all happening in one body. That's what makes it a little bit confusing to explain it. Because then, like if you're looking at me and I something triggers me and now I can see the thoughts, right? I can see them in my mind. They could be arrogant thoughts or angry thoughts, and I could maybe feel some emotion in the body. That is the ego part activated in that moment, right? But the difference is that before this shift that we had, so the shift was that our experience is that we are the space in which the ego parts can appear. The other one is when you are not the space, but you actually think you're some of the ego parts. So they kind of get glued to you, and you think that's you. So it's like I'm the humble one, I'm the good person. There's glue, and they're just kind of here, but that can't be you, right? You're something beyond that. And so there was a reason why I was explaining this. Let me just remember. Um, oh yeah, that this shift, which some people call self-realization, it's funny because a lot of people think that's already enlightenment, and it's very far from it. But the thing is that once that happens to you, that's when you're going to see the most of your ego, the depth of your ego. So, for example, the level of disgust that you have for other people or for yourself, the absolute hatred. Like you can find a level of hatred that probably Hitler had, right? A hatred for humanity. You just wanted the world to, to explode because you just hate everything and everyone. Um, and so isn't that funny that when you get to that advanced stage, the ego wants to say, oh, by now I'm just the most loving, there's just love and peace in me. And no, it's like actually there's a lot to see that you couldn't see before because there was such a resistance. Again, you were glued to the ego parts, like I'm a very good person. So if you think and you're always thinking, I'm a good person, I'm a good person, you're pushing away all of that stuff. A good person can't feel hatred, right? Or can't feel disgust. And the other thing I want to say that you said was it's both funny and fun that you can look at the ego, and once that shift happens to you, you're no longer trying to maintain an image even to yourself of being a good person. So you can actually embrace the other side that the ego would call a terrible person, maybe the worst person. You're a monster, right? That word that people like to use.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually essential as well. You can't move beyond anything that you haven't, experienced and seen in its totality. I was just going to say that it's funny thing, like as you're describing uh, the experience, the current experience that we both do have, I I saw my ego wanting your description to sound more enlightened.
And what would that have been like?
I don't know. I was like,
Oh, like more like
I'd prefer if we sounded like right at the end, you know?
I wonder what that description would be. It's like in our experience is that, but then we
Oh
would just be
yeah, it
like,
wasn't even like I had an alternative, and it wasn't even like you were saying something wrong. I was like, I wish we could say something even better. This sounds even more impressive.
and see, to everybody that's watching, that's the self-honesty. See, we're not trying to maintain this image of ourselves that we're this, oh, I'm enlightened or whatever. And that's a perfect example. It's like just own it that you, like Joe said, I actually wanted that description to sound much more enlightened. So
Mm,
maybe it's like, our experience, the ego dreams that maybe one day, maybe years down the road, we'll be able to say this. But then if you actually were enlightened, you would never say this. But
mm,
it would be like our general experience is that there are no triggers anymore.
mm.
We can't get angry. Anger doesn't exist. I don't.
Yeah,
It's been years since I felt anger.
there's no center to my experience. It's all, everything is collapsed into a singularity. Um, But what I was going to say is the things that you don't want to see are completely subjective to your own experience. So although the examples that Steve and I have just given might resonate with some people, but some people are like, oh, I'm always honest about those things, you know. But in that person's case, there'll be other things that are very painful to be honest about. So it's all about, the things that are the most painful for you to see. Generally, for most people, uh, they will come under the umbrella of not being a good person. That will be like a big portion of things. Um, but the specific things are completely down to your own experience. And then it's up to you to notice resistance about being honest about something. Um, you know, really being like, I am this. Um, And I've used this sort of visual a lot, but the way I see it in my experience is you can start to detect small amounts of discomfort, and it's almost like a truth is poking its very small portion of its head above the ground, and but you pay attention to it, and it's almost like pulling a carrot out of the ground, or something that has something underneath, and and then you just sort of dig at it a little bit more, and it's like, oh my God, there's this whole thing that I've been carrying around with me, and then that happens time and time and time and time again with with everything that you haven't wanted to look at, basically.
Um, another thing, again, in honesty. One thing that I do find, and it's been for a little while, I don't know, but it seems like my eyes have changed. I don't know exactly, it doesn't change physically, but something has changed in them. And so my ego loves to think that my eyes look enlightened. So that's one thing that is always kind of in my mind. And sometimes if I record videos and see, I just play along with the ego. So it's like if there's this thing that says, find an angle that it looks better, it's brighter. I
Mm.
literally just play along. I'm like, okay, fine. I'll just try to find an angle. And I just like it. So it's like those types of things, right? It's like the ego in my mind thinks that there are characteristics to being enlightened and that it
Mm.
has them, right?
Yeah.
Which is hilarious. Um, there was something else that I was going to say. We're talking about self-honesty. Um, yeah, I mean, it's incredible like that. I think I don't know who said it. Like, I don't know if it was Artem. He said, you're going to be proven, but it's not exactly like that. You have to admit that you're wrong again and again. And that is the whole process. Like the
Yeah.
entire process is, oh, I thought that I knew this. Oh my God, I was completely wrong. There's this. And it'll just keep going, right? It kind of probably to the end.
Yeah. And especially at more towards the beginning, um, there will be these feelings of like shame, humiliation. You've been wrong about everything, probably, or a lot of things. And of course, your ego absolutely hates that. It hates to. Again, the ego is so good at bartering. It might concede a bit of wrongness, but it won't look at the entire thing. That you're not completely wrong. Um, but yeah, the thing that we've already said is that the discomfort, pain, and everything that is so prevalent and strong and there in the beginning um, can be so dissuading or dissuasive, whatever the word is, to imagine, that this is going to continue, but it really does get so much easier. And you can be looking at um, parts of yourself that you could never have imagined were there. Like Steve said, the words don't do it justice, but when you actually see the depths of um,
Like
whether it's
violence.
violence, evil, just, demonic. I was saying to Steve today, that I've been processing it just feels like energy to me in my body, but it's so concentrated, all of those things like into like a ultra dense, thing that it's almost like you've dug so deep that you've finally found the thing that's at my ego's saying that at the bottom, but probably not at the bottom. Um, that you couldn't possibly imagine it. But in seeing it, these things become available to you because the judgment has decreased dramatically. You know, and it's very painful at the beginning. There's a lot of judgment, a lot of identification with these things. You see something that you are going to be honest, that you're honest about, and it's mortifying because you're bonded to it. You believe you are that. But of course, the further you go, this belief it evaporates. So you become, as Steve said, this container in which all these things arise, and there's no I am this anymore. There's no belief. There's the processing, the energetic processing, but there's no belief that this is a someone. Like, oh my God, Joe has all these things. He was this all along. You know, he was this horrible thing all along. Um, and that's what makes it quite fun, you know, the, the, that there's no problem with it.
Yeah. And it's funny, like in my mind, like we addressed a Beata. It's almost like we're having a conversation with her in my mind, but then I remember it's like anybody can watch this. The other thing that may be useful, I mean, it's for both men and women, but um, in our exploration of ourselves, I'll talk about me. An example of something that I think almost it's very rare if a man doesn't have it is actually a hatred of women, right? It's very strange to say that. So imagine that, me, I've literally never mistreated a woman in my life, but then to say that I've got or I had a lot of hatred of women, that sounds odd to people. But it's funny, it's interesting when you see this stuff and a hatred of women, which is it's such a big thing in the world of men, is objectifying women sexually, right? So it's like they're sexual objects. Now, for men especially, there would be a lot of resistance, like, oh, I'm not that bad, right? This would be the ego trying to cover it up. It's like, I'm not that guy. I'm not this evil guy. But what I was gonna say is maybe like a statement would be something like a man can never really love a woman until he has seen just how much he hates women. Like to such a degree, like we were saying, you think that it's this and you're on the surface, just like an iceberg. And you're like, oh, I get annoyed at women. And then you're, and every little degree, like deeper, there's going to be fear and judgment. And it's really difficult. Like when I started to see the sexual objectification in me at the very, very beginning, it felt so bad because my ego said, you're a monster. Like you're the worst man in the world. But funny enough, as I went deeper and deeper into it, and then you just become familiar with it, then of course you don't feel anything anymore, which the ego will say you've become truly evil. You don't even feel guilty anymore. But men, especially men, really I think that's like a huge shadow. And it's difficult to explore it because even men that look at pornography wouldn't admit that the real reason they're watching it is because they hate women. And the
Mm.
connection there is to see, this is what's very confusing. If a man is watching porn on a screen, he's probably looking at a woman that he finds very, very attractive, right? We we choose which one, oh my God, this one looks the best. And so that feeling of I like that doesn't seem to what's the word, go with I also hate her. But it's actually true. It's like I like how she looks and I hate her to her core. That's basically what it is. And so the fact that you're watching her get used basically as an object shows that you get aroused by seeing a woman treated like not like a human, but as an object. And so I wanted to talk about that briefly because it's a good example of the depth, right? And what would be very scary for men to do is to watch pornography, but actually embrace what they're truly feeling and to start saying it out loud as if, because, obviously when you're watching pornography, you're pretending that you're the guy having sex with a woman, right? That's the whole point. What would you say to the woman? Right? And then I can imagine how scary that would be. It's like, are you really admitting just how much you want to objectify her? Like what would you do exactly? What would you say? And that would be a very deep and powerful practice to first own the hatred that you have in your psyche for women. And the more that you get familiar with it and you feel it and you release it, well, guess what? Eventually, you'll actually be able to love women. So you see, most people think so. Some women would be horrified, right? They if they haven't gone very deep, they would be horrified if a man watches porn, right? But then the guy that the woman is with could not watch porn and yet still be objectifying her secretly, right? So there's all these things that you can hide, but deep down it's there, and which ties back into what we were talking about, which is self-honesty. You know, the journey can seem complicated, but in any given moment, whether it's like I said, hatred of women, objectifying, or you're jealous that person has a nice car, it doesn't matter what it is. Every moment is, what am I actually feeling? Like, come on, let's be honest, right? Let's be honest. Are you looking at the car like you don't have a nice car, you don't have a car, and somebody has a brand new BMW? And you look at it and you're pretending that you're not really angry. And you're like, man, I wish I could have that car. And you think, oh, that's it. That's all I'm thinking. But maybe deep down, you're literally like, I wish I could like destroy that car or worse, or kill that person, whatever it is. I'm so angry. And that woman, you know, or that man, they may look better than me. And you have layers and layers to this stuff. So it's like the more, and it can seem a little bit like the in terms of the layers, at first you might not be able to access it. So it's like you might the bottom level might be that you, like I said, this desire to harm. But the very top would be something like, oh, I wish I could have that car. And then as you're like, how can I be a little bit more honest? Is it possible that I hate this person for having the car? Fear, judgment, right? You're like, oh my God. And then you're like, oh, okay, I actually do. So when I'm every time I've seen a nice car, I wasn't just wanting the car. I was actually wishing maybe like something bad would happen to this person. I hate this person. Why do they have nice things and I don't? Am I being punished by the universe? All of these things, right? So isn't it incredible that if you're just honest, it's not a difficult journey in terms of that. It's difficult in terms of the experience of feeling. But in any given moment, what am I actually feeling? If you have no filters, if you're not trying to pretend to minimize, what am I actually feeling? Right?
Yeah, and the ego will have immense resistance. So even the examples that Steve says, when it's this, someone listening to that might be like, oh yes, but not yeah, maybe, but not that, not
Not
the
that.
lower levels. Because this is what we're working with when we're not conscious of what's there. So, but you can notice, what you can notice is the resistance that, that's a very big indicator that that's what's there. So if maybe in Steve's example, someone was listening and then they heard, I want to kill the guy who has the car. And if you notice there was any resistance to that statement, you want to kill him. I can promise you. So, although you might not be able to access what the ego wants to say exactly, you can notice resistance, or notice resistance to ideas. If that's a practice that you can do, say things like, uh, I hate this, I hate that, I want to do this. And if there's any sort of like contraction, any, the ego says things in literal words a lot as well. I remember a long time ago, I used to have just this voice that would say like, yeah, but not me. So if there was anything that like my ego didn't like, and it would happen all the time, it would be sort of speaking about, it could be anything. Um, and then my ego would just be like, yeah, but not me. Just to see, I don't have to look at that. I don't have to and then I noticed like why do I have this mechanism that likes to tell myself that I'm not these things all the time? Obviously because there was a lot of pain to look at associated with those things. Um, so that's what to look out for is the resistance to the things that are being said, and then the digging can start. But I had a couple other things based on what you were saying, Steve. So about the men hating women, of course. And I think in society, the way that society is, women are allowed to be more emotionally vulnerable and in touch with their emotions. This is a massive generalization. And I think in culture now, women are able to express their hatred of men more, which is good because it's there. It's there much more deeply. I think women en masse are getting much further, much quicker, but there's still a lot of identification because there's been untold amounts of abuse, you know. Um, but an example came to my mind where I saw on TikTok a woman had written a poem and it was about her hatred of men, and it was very well written and very like eloquently put, and it was a very like authentic um, expression, but it was still had a layer of ego protection around it. And I was like, wouldn't it be good if she was able to just crack through that a bit more and just be like, I fucking hate this, and this. And I want to kill you and sort of lose the structure there that was keeping it as a acceptable way of expressing hatred. Because I mean, if she's able to do that, I'm sure she'll be able to access that without much work. But that's just an interesting note on where we seem to be as a culture. And then about just the honest, it sort of goes back to your analogy about the car and being jealous. Um, I've told Steve this before, I think, but it was someone calling someone out for their dishonesty. He was, I think, some sort of spiritual coach or something. And the guy was saying that he wanted more abundance, he wanted a more, he himself was quite a semi-successful business owner, like a young person starting, but he was using this kind of flowery language, like, I want abundance in finances and in health and all these things. And the guy speaking to him just said, why don't you just say you want to be filthy rich? Because that's what he's saying, but his ego wouldn't be able to deal with that. Like
Yeah.
just and then you can look further in. I want to be filthy fucking rich. And then you want to be, the richest person ever. How do you want to get that money? And then, people might say, oh, I want to get it through like giving to the community. No, I want to get it like this. I want to have all the money right now. Um, but it's funny. It's actually again another funny thing when you realize how much you lie to yourself, and then you see through it. It's like, oh my God, I've just been trying to be this like image of what I want to be. And the actual motivators are so much starker than what you'd admit to yourself. But when you see it, it can be hilarious as well.
Yeah, and I wanted to say when you said that the woman wrote a poem, like
Hmm.
she hates men and she wrote a poem, and by what you said, she said like a lot, but she didn't go to the very, because obviously people would think that it would be too much
Yeah,
or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And that made me think of something that would kind of explain, I think. So, in World War II with the Nazis, right? I think it's very interesting to talk about this. It's all related. So if you think about it, I'm going to get to the hateful part because obviously they did the most horrendous things. But if you think about it, so Germany was a country, and very quickly, right? It's like in the First World War, they somehow were blamed for everything, and so the state of the country that was Germany was like it was destroyed physically, destroyed in every other way. So I think the whole population was like they didn't have jobs, and so everybody was poor. It was just like a mess. And so by the time Hitler comes along, the entire population is feeling probably every single negative thing that you can imagine, hopeless and all this. And so he offers to fix the country and that everything will be wonderful. And in the beginning, he did, right? He actually did. And people are like, wow. He built the highway system, the Autobahn, and a million things. But where is this going? So how is it possible, in those documentaries? So I'm using my hands to like imagine the country, the borders, right? And you have Germany, and then it becomes Nazi Germany, and it's a dictatorship. How is it that those human beings did those things? How is it that, in the population, not even soldiers, but the population where a regular woman in a building would literally tell the Nazis there are Jews living here, which is like unbelievable to imagine like that a person would do that. So what does that have to do with all of this, with hate, with hate? It's because all of this stuff lives inside the minds of all human beings. And we just don't understand how people are able to do that because it's already in there. All you need is the right environment and a complete identification with the ego, which, everybody is, which is unconscious. And like I said, the right situation. So why was it possible there? And this is a theory that I've thought about, and I've heard this once, that if you imagine that you are in a group of people, so like in a room, 30 people, and everybody kind of looks like you all agree. It's like you feel that you're part of this group, so you feel like a togetherness, right? You feel safe and everybody kind of gets along. And then let's say that somebody gets an idea to do something horrible, like beat up a woman or something horrible like that, that the whole group is going to do, right? So this would be horrible. So some people might think, well, this is terrible in the group. But then what if this is like a psychology thing that I read once? So you have the 30 people, and then they all kind of look at each other, and let's say that somebody says, but it's okay, right? It's okay if we beat up this woman for fun. And then as everybody looks at each other and everybody kind of agrees, kind of, I think it's okay. I think it's safe. There is this psychological thing that happens where if everybody agrees and they feel safe in this cocoon, right? We're all the same, we're all friends, that human beings will do anything, no matter how bad it is, if they just look at each other, because it's kind of that fitting in thing. I think if 30 people all feel like they fit in with each other, then it becomes this like I don't even know what it is where they could just do anything. And that's what the Nazis did. And so if you think about a man that has the hatred of women in his mind, so the stories of like mass rape, right, as they were invading, and then people are like, how did they do that? Were those men evil? Well, I mean, the acts were evil, but that was there all along. That's what we were talking about, right? That men have this hatred of women, and that this it's probably mixed in with, sexuality and everything. And so when they have the opportunity, then the group that I just talked about, 30, well, what if it's an entire country, right? I don't know how, maybe it was 50 million people. There was a dictatorship, there was a government, there are tanks, it's like an entire thing. Once you're a member of that society and you feel safe, meaning like Hitler's taking over the whole world, so we're safe, like nobody's going to put us in jail, nothing is going to happen to us. In the mind, it's kind of like the ego, the darkest parts are like, oh, so I live in a world, basically, I'm in a society where I can just do this because nothing's going to happen to me. And deep down, I've always wanted to do it, like rape a woman in the mind, deep in the mind. Then that happens, right? And so the other thing, just to wrap it up, is um, something about, when you go deeper and deeper into this stuff. Um, yeah, connected to the poem that you said, The Woman That Hates Men, if she just went right for it. If she actually went right for it, and if she was probably someone that had like many abusive relationships. Let's say man after man is just treating her horribly, right? So she absolutely hates men. So to actually go for it, she wouldn't be able to do it because then people would think she's crazy, is the type of thing that the Nazis did. The most horrific thing. So like the men who I think they did this in the beginning, they would line up people and just shoot them. And then they would fall into a ditch and they just had to keep shooting and shooting people. So that's an example. Or the same thing as a firing squad where you're just aiming a gun and you just shoot people. It's that level. So inside the mind of a woman, and same thing for man, right? If he was mistreated by women, is that level of hatred where it's like I would shoot you, I would put you in a concentration camp, I would turn you into ashes in a crematorium. That's why that stuff happened, right? So it's crazy to think that the most horrible things that, humanity has done is because of this imaginary thing in the mind called the ego, and it's compacted, like you said, it's concentrated. So where anger in childhood should have been something that was just explored very innocently, right? And you tell a child, oh, this is called anger, so feel it. You might tell the child, don't hit the other child, don't do this, but feel this anger. When that doesn't happen, especially in people that it's really suppressed, if you have a very aggressive parent and the child learns, whoa, I can't never feel anger, or they're just going to hit me. Well, that little anger that's supposed to be healthy, then it becomes compacted and concentrated. And then eventually, once there's enough mistreatment and suppression, it is a pure hatred, a hatred to destroy the world. I wish the world would explode, nuclear bombs, just blow everything up. This world is useless, right? It's that level. And I think that every human being deep down has that. If they have an ego, they have to have that hatred.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. So the only difference in the our experience is the identification. So in
Yeah.
the examples that Steve gave, it's the exact same stuff that is in every human being, I would
Yeah.
say. But the bondage to the I am this results in action in the real world. Whereas going through and processing your emotions allows you to access that which is there, which is why we say, you cannot believe the depth of what's there when you see it further and further and further. And this is the same for everyone, by the way. The further you go on this path, you just see more of that. You
Yeah.
get
You're
you
not
get
becoming an angel.
you you don't get to see more. I mean, there are other things, but in terms of, like your experience of the world and how unbelievable it can be, and your unbounded love for life itself. But that's separate, that's your experience. But what you see of what's inside is just more and more and deeper and worse and worse and worse. That's how it goes.
Oh, I was going to say, so yeah, what you're saying deeper and deeper. So what most people think is to use like maybe my phone or just this Kleenex box, like from beginning to end. So this is the beginning of the journey, and then this is enlightenment. People think it's just like more love, more love, more love, more love, and just more peace. And literally, there's going to be I guess the biggest chunk, which is from self-realization to enlightenment, which would probably be even longer is it will get worse and worse, meaning the stuff that you will see that is in your subconscious, the level, like we said, it will get to the very bottom, which is the sort of horror that happened in the world. You have the same hatred within you. So what happens is it's going to get worse and worse until it can't get any worse because you just can't. There's nothing else that you could possibly do in your mind. Right? Like imagining the worst things, exploding a hospital with babies. Like there's nothing worse than that with babies. So eventually, if you are able to just keep going and experience all of it, then it will start getting better. And what people think is, oh, this stuff, like, don't even look at it and just skip over it. And that somehow you're just going to get to love and peace, like, just by accident. No, that is actually probably the biggest block to love and
Mm,
peace is the stuff that you have to look at.
yeah. So just think about how unappealing everything we just said is to the ego.
Yeah.
Just think
He goes like, I don't
how
want that.
how and why 99.9% of recurring people get stuck in you can call it stuck, um, the sort of more angelic area when you're transcending, you're being, drawn into things that reinflate an idea that you are more perfect,
Holy.
all of these things. Of course, it's completely understandable, but um, I think there's some deep knowledge in everyone that it's like, of course, it's the opposite. Of
Yeah.
course, it has to be the opposite. Yeah. Um,
And I know we're getting towards the end. I was just going to say, just to make it very clear that what you said, because that was very good, like the example of the Nazis and everybody that did those things. They had the hatred inside of their mind, like everybody does, but they were completely unconscious. And so that means that if they had hatred and they were finally able to just do it without any punishment, right? That they were identified with that. So what that means is that when it arises in their mind, basically it's like that thought takes over the body, which is kind of crazy. So it should never translate into the body, into real life. And so the difference that we're talking about is on the spiritual journey, you can experience the same level of hatred as a Nazi did, except what you're doing has nothing to do with other people. It's literally a mind, what would you call it? A mind exercise. You can act it out when you're alone, but it's literally make believe. And so this is the difference. You can explore the same hatred that someone that did horrible things had, and yet you're just doing it to release it. Whereas they were possessed by it. And unfortunately, then their bodies did things to other people.
yeah. And all these things, these hatred, these feelings, thoughts in the mind, they are the manifestations of suppressed emotion. So these are the products of repressed emotion. It's not like, oh, we have evil in us deep down. That's not what it is. It's that the emotions that we should have felt as children and in our development have been suppressed, and the way that they are living in our bodies are they manifest in the form of rage, hatred, and violent images and all of these things. So they're like almost expressions that, it's trying to get out, it's trying to be expressed, but the only thing that can do is live in your mind as these things. Um, but yeah, maybe that's a good place to wrap things up. We've actually been going for an hour and a half. I managed to
Oh, wow.
place the timer on. So, yeah. So we will be having live on Monday, and a week from today, the next Q&A. So if you have any questions, of course, put them in the ask a question category, and Ms. Civil get to them next week.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. See you guys.
See ya.